Hi, I'm Erik Hall. I'm the digital sports editor at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I'm joined by Hal Bodley, who was APSE president in 1981-82 while sports editor at the Wilmington, Delaware News Journal. Thanks for joining me, Hal.
My pleasure.
How did you get involved with the founding of APSE?
Well, we received an invitation from Dave Smith and some of the others to go to New York on June the 4th, 1974. There were a lot of problems that we had with the Associated Press, some of the things they were doing and not doing. So we wanted to kind of air that out. So we got together in New York. There was about 150 of us. And we decided to talk about the AP and what they could do, what could they do better. And we decided at the ultimate end of the meeting to form this organization, which became APSE. So that's how we were born. We patterned it, Erik, a little bit after the APME, the Associated Press Managing Editors, and we're off and running.
What are your memories of that meeting to get things launched at the New York City Squire Inn?
That was quite a place. Not exactly a first-class hotel, but it was fine for what we did. I think the big thing was that many of the sports editors were basically, graded on how well they wrote, the awards they won, rather than running a department. And we talked a lot about that day, about actually the sports executive, the managing editor of sports, that type of thing. And we sort of moved in that direction. And I personally was in that category. I was a writer and had won some awards and did a lot of covering of major events. But we really wanted to run a real solid sports department and improve basically the quote unquote toy department of the newspapers. And I think we all that day began to move in that direction.
It sounds like ethics was something you kind of took on from that first meeting. How did that come about?
It really was. I don't know whether it was Dave Smith, the first president, who assigned me this, but I was very involved early on. And he said, Hal, why don't you write the ethics that we should go by for the sports editors and for the sports departments? And I jumped in with both feet and worked on it diligently. And I found out that some of the sports editors received television sets at Christmas time from the teams they covered. Some of them received free air travel on the charters of the teams. Many of them got TV sets in cases of liquor. And this was all out. I thought that the sports editor should have no conflict. I thought it should be basically an independent type of person and not have and leave themselves open for that type of thing. I didn't think an official scorer in a baseball game should be a sports editor. I felt there's an out and out conflict for that. How do you cover a game? You're the official scorer, and then you go down and you have to interview a player who you took a hit away from. So we wrote all these ethics. Well, they were presented. That was the second year of the organization. They were presented. And I was almost run out of town, Erik. It was amazing. I was lucky to escape with my life because the editors didn't want to hear this. But, as we moved on, of course, this was adopted. And I think the ethics of all sports departments now, especially, has become much, much better because we started that back in the mid 1970s.
How did you go about starting that process of coming up with what you thought were the ethics? What was this something you were doing on your own, or you were doing it with a lot of people?
Well, the editor of our newspaper at that time was a gentleman named Norman Isaacs, editor of the Wilmington newspaper, and he'd always spoken out about this. He was on the Pulitzer Prize winning committees, and he'd done an awful lot in that area. And I sat down with him, and he helped me an awful lot about this type of thing. In fact, I used to teach and talk to the people at the American Press Institute. And one of the things that he told me to always tell the editors that they're not doing their job. They need to crack down on this type of thing. So I really worked very hard at this and presented it and thought I'd done a good job, but it wasn't very well received at first. But I think now everybody would applaud what we did in those early days.
Another thing you were there for the start of was the creation of the contest. What do you remember about APSE deciding to start having a contest and getting that going?
Well, in 1976, we were about 2 years old, 2 or 3 years old. We were sort of struggling. Not too many people knew about us in the business. And we decided to do something that would really draw everyone in, draw all the sports departments into APSE. So we decided to start the contest. not only for the writers, but for the sports sections. It became, a really, really big thing. And we, categorized it by the, the circulation of the newspapers, and to win an APSE award years later became a very big thing. And then, of course, a couple of years later, we started something else, the Red Smith Award, which is now one of the most prestigious awards in anything, really, in any sport or even in any journalism type of thing. And we opened it up not only to sports writers, but to editors and people that, put together the sports sections.
What went into deciding to call it the Red Smith Award and making Red Smith then the first winner?
Well, there were a lot of us, the quote unquote, the older guys that just, idolized Red Smith. And we thought that, he was the ultimate person to name it after. So we did give it to him the first year, and Jim Murray got it the second year, which was 1982. And over the years, some really, really wonderful people have received that award.
Those, like 81 and 82, those are the years you're president. How involved were you in the process of like giving out the award? I was the secretary treasurer for a number of years. And let me go back a little bit. We had a couple of conventions that were really they were very, very good. I mean, we had Pheasant Under Glass in Dallas one year. We did a lot, but we actually didn't have enough money to pay our bills. So Bill Millsaps, who was the president at the time, and we pooled our money and we gave the organization $5,500 to bail them out. And we knew we had to do something, financially that would really put the organization on solid ground. So that was one of the biggest nightmares. But you go back to 1982, and I remember that because that was the year I was president, and it was at Tarpon Springs, which is the Innisbrook Resort. And we started to register people. Well, God bless him, but Bob Seeger was the secretary treasurer then, Eric, and he started to register people, and he became ill. They rushed him to the hospital with a heart attack, and we had nobody to register the members that were coming in at that time. So my wife, Patricia, had been with me many times before, and so she sat down at the table, and we registered all the people that came in then. Bob Seeger had triple bypass surgery. He survived, but of course, he's no longer with us now. And Bob was a sports editor?
Pardon?
Bob was a sports editor?
Of the Detroit News, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he was a fine gentleman.
Was he able to attend the rest of the conference after that?
No.
I figured he had to miss the conference.
He was throughout in the hospital, and we went in to see him. We were very worried about him because he became very ill.
Yeah. Was he able to go back to work and things after that eventually?
After he had the surgery and everything, he did for a few years, yes. And I lost track of him after that, but he was one of the the founders of the organization also.
You talked about giving the organization $5,500. Was that you and Bill each gave the organization?
No, that was a total amount that we gave to pay our bills and everything.
Yeah.
And then a few years later, I'm sort of jumping ahead a little bit, Eric, but a few years later, we also had the same problems. And my assistant sports editor in Wilmington, who also became the first sports editor at USA Today, Henry Freeman, at that time, he was the vice president moving up to the presidency. And Henry had a meeting, and I'll never forget it, where he really laid the law that each of the people that ran these various segments of the convention would have to watch how much they spend so that we would not have this happen again. And obviously now we're on solid footing. I know you are, and I'm very proud of that.
What does APSE mean to you that you and Bill were willing to give the organization $5,500 between you? That's $25,000 now with inflation. That's a lot of money for you guys to give to the organization.
Well, luckily we were able to do it, and we wanted to, we had to do something because the year that we had the Pheasant Under Glass. Have you ever had pheasant under glass? I mean, what a delightful dish that is until you get the bill, and that's really a problem as it was then. And we decided we were going to cut down on that, but we raised our dues. And we did a lot of things to make put the organization on a more solid footing. I think the contest helped an awful lot. More newspapers came aboard. More people came to the convention. We made the conventions more exciting. Jay Searcy, who at that time was the sports editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer, he decided that we should have these workshops, bring in some experts. And that really helped the conventions, because people would come and they would learn an awful lot and take a lot back home to their newspapers and make them even better.
You were quite involved for several years. What led to you then in 1981 becoming the president of APSE?
Well, I think I just came up through the ranks and been very involved. Became vice president. I was secretary treasurer and then vice president and then ultimately president. And, it was a great trip. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I was very honored to be able to do it. In fact, I still have, many of the things that were given me by APSE on my walls here at home.
How was that balancing being a sports editor for you and leading APSE?
It was difficult. It always is, but you make time for it. And I had such a great passion for both the sports editorship and also for APSE, and spent an awful lot of time. But you don't do it by yourself, Eric. You have to have a lot of people helping you. And a lot of people certainly did. I remember Bill Dwyer at that time was in Milwaukee. He went on to LA, of course. But Bill Dwyer helped me with the newsletter. He would write that, and we would have all these types of things to keep communications going and to make the organization more vibrant. And I think we were really successful in doing that in the early years, because honestly, we really did struggle.
When did you start to see APSE on solid footing, did you feel?
I think in the 80s, in the later 80s, I think it really did. Of course, I moved from sports editorship to becoming an editor at USA Today, baseball editor at USA Today. And I sort of, backed off a little bit on my involvement in APSE, but I saw it was really good to stand back and see something that you put so much effort and so much of yourself into to succeed as well as it was doing then. I think the Red Smith Award gave an awful lot of publicity and prestige for the organization, the contest for the newspapers. Back in those days when we started that contest, if you got a first place in any of the writing, the column writing, or in the newspaper sections, it was quite an honor then. And I think that really helped the organization. It made people have an identity of us.
What were some difficulties journalism was facing as well at that time, around when you were president, and getting the organization going that APSE was trying to resolve?
Well, I think the biggest problem that we had was getting the reporters on board with the editors. Again, I go back to the first year when many of us were writer/editors, but the writers had their own idea. That the organizations, the writers' organizations, had some ideas that they didn't like the APSE to do. They didn't like us to take away the scoring from actually these baseball writers were getting several $100 to score a baseball game, and it was a credibility problem. And I think of anything that I'm most proud of as I look back on my career and also on APSE is the credibility issue. I think we really did establish that. And sadly, I'm a little bit worried that it's not happening right now with the demise of the printed newspaper and all of the types of internet news organizations that we have now. I think that the credibility that we tried so hard to establish is probably not nearly as visible today as it should be.
You talked about conventions some, and what are some memories that stand out to you from those conferences and conventions the APSE had in those early years?
Well, I think the biggest thing we'd worried about when we'd have a guest speaker or someone that didn't show up on time, we'd, have a little bit of a panic attack, right? Wondering whether or not they were going to be coming from the airport on time. Also wondering if we were going to have enough turnout, and whether or not the hotel would supply what we need. There were just all kinds of details that we had to worry about in those days, and luckily we had a good group that put it all together.
What do you think is your maybe biggest legacy or contribution to APSE overall from your years being involved?
I would like to think that making the sports editor the sports executive of the newspaper, where you have a staff and you deal with that staff and you work with them as an executive editor or whatever of that department. I think that is the biggest key that we changed, because as I said, in the early days, you thought of a sports editor. Oh, that was the columnist that won the award. That was the guy that covered the ball, that covered the World Series, that covered this and covered that. And we moved away from that now. And most of the sports editors now probably don't write. They're editors and they're executives of their departments. And I think that's a really good thing because it's really difficult to do both.
What has APSE meant to you professionally in your career?
Well, it's meant an awful lot. As I look back on my career, I started out as a writer and became an editor. And I like to think that to be able to put together a good sports department and many of the things that we learned, the lessons that we learned along the way, to be able to hire the right people, to handle a department of 15 or 20 people and have them cover the beats that they love and have a passion for that sport that they love. And at the same time, make sure that their journalism is the type of journalism that would stand up in any part of the paper. It's not the toy department anymore. It's actually journalism with credibility on the newspaper.
What has APSE meant to you personally?
To have been a founder of it, back in the days, and I think back of so many of the people that are no longer with us, that we had so many good times with, so much camaraderie with the people that we actually love, that were in the business, and we would talk about the business. And I think we had a great love for the business of putting out a sports section, putting out a sports department and that type of thing. And I look back, and as you and I talked a little bit prior to this to get ready for this chat, and I looked at the people that I knew so well, that I loved, that are no longer with us. And I guess as we age and everything changes and they're no longer with us, but it kind of hurts me deep down that they're not with us because we worked so hard to make this go. And now the younger people, the people that are taking over this organization, are doing such a fabulous job. I mean, it's a huge, huge organization now compared to what we had when we started back in 1974.
Did you think it would last 50 years when you started it?
When you're young and energetic, you don't think about 50 years, but never thought about that. But there were times when we couldn't pay our bills. I thought maybe it might not make it, but we made it work out, and everything worked out fine. And I think we're a great complement to the business. And actually, this is not on a soapbox or anything, but I think our business is hurting a little bit because we don't have near the compassion for it and the credibility for it that we used to have. I mean, with all the internet and the types of things that we're doing, and so many of the papers that we loved are just basically not being published now, or they've dwindled down, and they've not had the staff they used to have, and so many of the well-known writers are no longer with them. That's what hurts me more than anything else. But to have been part of something that moved up to a crescendo, so to speak, is very, very proud for me.
You talked some about your relationship with Henry Freeman. What was it like for you to see him go on and become president of the organization and then also win the Red Smith Award?
I'm so proud of Henry. I hired him in Wilmington to be my assistant, and it was one of the best moves that I ever made. And not only that, but he became a very, very close friend. And then, of course, I went to work with him at USA Today for 25 years. And after Wilmington, he went to Oakland, and then he came to USA Today, and then moved on to the front office, so to speak, of some of the newspapers he worked with. But he's a pure journalist. He loves newspapering. I don't know of anybody better that can cover the big story. He can put a staff together and have everyone go in the right direction to cover a major story. And I saw that in him when he came to work with us in Wilmington, Delaware.
What advice would you have for future presidents of APSE?
To love the business you do and to feel the responsibility you have to do something that the public needs and yearns to have, that maybe the public's not even aware of it today. But I know that they need to, get back to where we used to be, what we used to do, and the credibility and the types of things that we used to do in journalism that we don't do now. It troubles me.
Go ahead.
I don't know about you, but it troubles me sometimes to pick up a newspaper and see a story, and why didn't he get both sides of it? I mean, how can you do that story without, a legitimate source? How can you not do this? identify that guy in the picture. I mean, so on. I mean, I get very worked up about it. And my wife always tells me, now watch yourself, just slow down a little bit. You're no longer doing this, you know.
What are you doing now?
Basically, I'm semi-retired. After USA Today for 25 years, I was fortunate enough to be brought aboard when MLB.com was forming, a Major League Baseball advanced media. And we started a television network. And we had, of course, the website for Major League Baseball. And they asked me after I retired from USA Today to come aboard and help them. And I did that for 5 years. And I decided it was time to play more golf and write some books and do some things like that. So I'm now the senior correspondent emeritus for MLB.com. And Erik, do you know what that means? It means you're old and don't get paid.
And you've got three books that you've done in your career. Do you want to promote some of those books that you've done?
Well, I just finished one that had nothing to do with baseball or sports, but I did a history of the Bel Air Country Club in Florida. And it turned out to be an amazing history because some of the greatest golfers of all times played there. It started in 1897. So it's the first time I ever did a history book. And that's been very well received. That came out at the end of last year. It's a coffee table book. My book, How Baseball Explains America, was published in 2014. And I'm somewhat modestly say that it was #1 on Amazon for a while. So I had a lot of fun with that. And it keeps me busy. I'm working on a novel right now. I don't know that it'll ever get off the ground because it's hard to be a Mike Lupica or some of the sports writers that have become these great novelists. But it's called Take Me Out to the Murder. It's a story about a high-paid, bright baseball player that gets this huge contract and he murders his agent. And that's all I can tell you. And I think a lot of them want to do that.
Sounds exciting. Are there any other stories about your years with APSE you want to share or anything else you want to add? Or
not really, just that it's been a great journey. I made so many good friends there. And without that, I think part of my life would have certainly been a vacuum.
Well, thanks so much for your time, Hal. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And good luck to you and good luck to APSE.
Thanks.